Welcome to Radical Feminist Perspectives. Today, we are going to hear about the book Gendertrolling, but How Misogyny Went Viral by Karla Mantilla. And it's published 2015. It's being discussed fantastically by the author herself, Karla Mantilla, with an introduction by Marian Rutigliano. So over to Marian first and then to Karla.
Hi, it's really good to be here. If you are online at all on social media and you attempt to offer as a woman and you attempt to offer an opinion about anything, almost anything, you're aware of how vicious uh, backlash or responses from many men can be, even about something as simple as I use this kind of cookware or just something. It doesn't even have to be very controversial, but certainly if it's about women's rights, if it's about uh, trans issues, if it's about anything having to do with relationships between men and women, it can be vicious. And it was even 10 years ago when Karla wrote this book. It's a very hard book to read because of what, she really dug down and got incredible quotes and it talked about what was happening back then, which has only gotten worse. Um, Before you launch into it, Karla, can you just briefly tell us why you wrote this book and then talk about the book?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and talk about it. Before I talk about why I wrote it, I did want to say that the title, Gendertrolling, How Misogyny Went Viral, is a little bit regrettable, especially given how things have evolved in terms of using the word gender instead of sex-based. So I want to acknowledge that maybe gender trolling isn't the best word, but it is what it is at this point. So why I wrote the book, I was involved with the kind of the new atheist movement in the Washington, D.C. area at the time. And quite a few women I knew were being targeted in just vicious and virulent ways. Just shocking numbers of mostly men, as far as discernible, were attacking them. And it was quite a few different women. And no one saw this as anything having to do with being a woman. They just didn't see it as a pattern. I mean, they were just like, wow, this is weird. Why is this happening? So I could clearly see this was a targeting of them as women, and that it was a pattern, that it was a feminist issue, and that it was a new way of targeting and silencing women online in the environment online. Next slide. I wanted to talk about this in terms of the historical pattern of silencing. So I just have a couple quotes here to kind of highlight that. Susan B. Anthony in the year 1900 wrote that no advanced step taken by women has been so bitterly contested as that of speaking in public. For nothing which they have attempted, not even to secure the suffrage, have they been so abused, condemned, and antagonized, which is pretty much exactly what this significant online harassment is about. And Mary Beard commented, she's a professor of classics was at Cambridge. I believe she's now retired. She, on her overview of a historical overview of women's role, she said, "We have never escaped a certain male cultural desire for women's silence." So in the context of the historical silencing of women, I have, next slide, I have a few examples I just want to highlight. Starting in 350 BCE, Aristotle's work, Politics, he wrote, "Silence is a woman's glory, but this is not equally the glory of man." So this precedent, I'm sure you all know, it has a long historical pattern, long historical precedent. In 8 BCE, Homer's epic poem Odyssey, there's an instance where the wife of Odysseus comes down from her private quarters to the public part of her home where she addresses her adolescent son Telemachus and some other men who are there, some adult warriors. When she's trying to speak with them, Telemachus, I see someone says it should be 800 BCE. My apology. Typo. Telemachus tells his mother that because she's a woman, she has no right to speak. That speech, quote, speech will be the business of men, all men. He says that he orders her to return to her quarters, and she obeys. Then, of course, the Bible, written, this is the second, in Corinthians, which is written approximately around 100 CE, admonishes that women should not speak in church. And church was the prominent public arena for speech in the first century. Later on, skipping to English writer and philosopher Mary Estelle, she observed in her writings that men were trying to prevent women from writing. Mary Wollstonecraft, later on, 100 years later, was taunted for speaking out as being a hyena in petticoats. There's a lot of examples. These are just a couple selected. In 1840, there was a World Anti-Slavery Convention. A lot of women showed up. Women had been very prominent in the abolitionist movement, and yet the Credentials Committee of the convention decided that women were, quote, constitutionally unfit for public and business meetings. And finally, in the United States, Lucy Stone, who was an abolitionist and suffragist, was asked to write the commencement speech at Oberlin College at her own graduation, but she was barred from reading it because it was not appropriate for women to be speaking in public. So the power of naming. I wanted to talk about the whole kind of idea behind the book is naming this phenomenon called, and this next slide, please, called gender trolling. Gender trolling is basically, it's my name for pervasive online harassment, which I will give 7 characteristics for that kind of make it very distinct from other kinds of online harassment and other kinds of online trolling. But this kind of pattern has the same effect as other historical patterns of silencing women. Next slide, please. It drives women out of public spaces.
Sorry, I've got a problem with the slides, but I'll get it sorted out. So
okay,
yeah.
Thank you. These patterns drive women out of public spaces and hinders them from getting recognition and respect in the public sphere. So the reason why I wanted to write this book was I felt like this was a phenomenon that was happening, that was pervasive, that was driving women out of, or attempting to drive women out of public spaces. I had much in common with other forms, and this pattern has much in common with other forms of sex-based harassment, abuse, and violence. So these patterns, domestic violence, rape, date rape, stalking, sexual harassment in the workplace, street harassment, and femicide are all patterns that have been previously unnamed. They're varied expressions of misogyny, but before they were named, women kind of didn't have any way to talk about many of them. I think rape has probably been the one that's been most often named, but domestic violence was just seen as a personal problem. Sexual harassment in the workplace, likewise. Stalking and street harassment, before they were named, were just kind of, it were things that women had to put up with, but they didn't even know how to, they weren't seen as pervasive patterns of violence and abuse against women. What's interesting is that all these patterns have been very widespread. They're very widespread in terms of how much they happen. And yet, paradoxically, they have been just unacknowledged and invisibilized as though they weren't happening because we didn't have a name for them. And until feminists, of course, campaigned to raise awareness. Before feminist activism brought these into public consciousness, these forms of misogyny were unacknowledged, and therefore they had no recognizable social existence. Without a recognition of their social existence, they were seen as matters of private and individual shame by the women who experienced them. So, for example, like date rape, when it happened to women, before it was named and understood as this is a thing, many women just felt like, what did I do wrong? And it was just something that happened to her individually. Gender trolling, which, this widespread sexual harassment or harassment on the internet, is similar in a way if you look at sexual harassment is to the workplace. It's trying to keep women out of the workplace, harass them, keep them in their place, or street harassment into public spaces. Gender trolling, I believe, is kind of the equivalent activity in the internet, trying to drive women, if not off the internet, into subordination. So the difference between generic online trolling and gender trolling. The important thing to understand is that generic trolls engage in their activities for the enjoyment and amusement they get out of having annoyed, upset, angered, and hurt others. It's probably that almost all these generic trolls are men. This is a kind of particularly male activity. Although, again, there's very little way to ascertain, get real data on the sex of people on the internet because of the anonymity. The thing about generic trolls is even while they're doing this, whatever they're saying or posting, they don't necessarily believe in it. They're just doing it because they're trying to upset people, and they get enjoyment out of that. A couple examples of generic trolling are bait and switch. There was a really common one. I don't think it's so common now, but it was maybe 15 years ago or so. It's called rickrolling, where there was be a serious forum online talking about some political, topic, say politics or economics, or could be anything. And the troll would post, say, this is a really important video to look at this. And when the user clicked on the link, it was to a 1987 music video of Rick Astley singing the song, Never Gonna Give You Up. So it was, because his name was Rick Astley, they called it rickrolling. And they just thought it was hysterical to do that. Concern trolling is where a troll would go onto an online forum and they would pretend to share their concerns about the topic. So, for example, somebody might be writing about, say, it's not good to consume water in disposable plastic water bottles. So the concern troll would agree, but keep introducing problems such as, well, but what about people that can't find water in other forms? What about people who don't have access to other kinds of water bottles? What about the problems if we convert production from plastic to glass or other materials? What about reducing, if plastic manufacturers quit producing so many plastic water bottles, what about the job loss? So they just keep raising concerns, and they don't actually believe in any of or care. They're just trying to annoy people. Another kind of type of generic trolling is called sea lioning, which is similar to concern trolling. It's where trolls would ask polite or seemingly polite or reasonable questions about some topic. So, for example, someone might say, be talking about, say, sexism, and someone would say, well, I don't, can you give some examples? Can you explain this? I don't understand. How does it work? When does it happen? Does it always happen? So they just keep asking these really basic questions, and the idea is to derail the discussion and to get derived laughs from that. Advice trolling is something that people would use just to mess with people, again, to make fun of people. Two examples are they would instruct a user to download more RAM, which is random access memory, which actually can't be downloaded. So there are even created YouTube videos showing people how to download more RAM, again, just to annoy people. Delete System 32 is another thing. They would tell people to do that. It will speed up your computer. Well, actually, if you delete System 32, it's essential to running the operating system on Windows computers, so it would crash the entire computer. Flaming, that's just basically what we often know, just insults, name calling, antagonism. But again, trolls are doing this not because they're so angry, but they just want to create a flame war and enjoy the brouhaha that ensues. The last one is much more serious, and it's called swatting, which is where trolls will call in an emergency service, such as to the police or fire department, and report a serious threat like a bomb, a shooting, a fire, a kidnapping. And that results in a special weapons and tactics or SWAT team arriving at the person's home, at the victim's home. An example of this actually happens not infrequently, and it still happens quite a bit. But a particularly horrible one in 2017 in Kansas, a man was shot by police after there was an argument between two male video game players. And again, most of these things are done by men. One gamer was annoyed with the other, and he said he was going to get him. And so then the other gamer gave him the wrong address, just a random address. Or I think it was the address of somewhere he had lived previously. So then the first gamer got this kind of anonymous service to call the police and report that someone at that address had shot his father and was holding the other family members hostage. When the police arrived, and the man came out, they shot and killed him. So these kinds of things can have very serious effects. So the characteristics of gender trolling, they're different, again, than generic trolling. Gender trolls do believe very passionately, even obsessively, in the stances they're taking. They're not saying the things they're saying to annoy or upset people. They have sincerely held convictions, so they're not joking. They want to inspire fear and to drive the target, along with her opinions, out of public discourse online. One, I thought, particularly astute generic troll who very much objected to this cyber harassment and felt that it was artless, pointed out the difference between generic trolling and what I call gender trolling. He said, quote, "Threatening to rape someone on Twitter isn't trolling. That's just threatening to rape someone on Twitter." So in his mind, there's just it's just flat-footed and there's no art to it. I mean, I think a lot of trolls, generic trolls, take some pride in the supposed art to it. So that I have defined in this book, for the purposes of kind of understanding this phenomenon, 7 characteristics that make of what's happening gender trolling, and as a distinct pattern from other kinds of internet activities. So the first one is that gender trolling happens or occurs when a woman asserts any kind of opinion online. It could be, and I've talked to women and read about women who were targets of vicious campaigns against them for opining on breastfeeding. One food blogger was attacked quite a lot. Someone was writing about sustainable housing. Could be sports, video gaming, comics, comedy, atheism, cycling, all kinds of things. Mary Beard, that professor of classics, was the target of a sustained gender trolling campaign at one time. Ashley Judd, the actor, commented on a basketball game play. The women who supported Caroline Criado Perez's campaign to have a woman's face on a British banknote, that was a particularly virulent campaign against her and against members of parliament who were supporting her, Stella Creasy and Louise Mensch. The second characteristic is that the gender trolling attacks involve graphic, sexualized, and gender-based insults. So women, of course, are called cunts, sluts, whores, and much worse. They are sexually shamed, so disparaging comments about their genitals. Of course, they're insulted. Much attention is paid to insulting women's appearance, being ugly, fat, old, and obviously much more. And their graphic and pornographic depictions are made of the women, either through Photoshop or AI or just all kinds of things. One woman had a thing made where there's some kind of I don't know if it was a video game. I don't think it was a video game, but anyway, it was this where men could pretend to punch her and she would get all bruised, just. The third characteristic of gender trolling is, and this is a really basically one of the keystone ones, is rape and death threats, often credible ones. So men would post numbers of rape and death threats along with her home address, her telephone number, or other real-life data about her, while egging others on to use that information, which would increase the possibility that she might be attacked in real life. Threats of attacks would be about specific times, dates, and places. That happened to Caroline Criado Perez and some of the members of parliament, where there were, bomb threats sent to them, where they said, we're going to go to your home at this time and this date. The gender trolls would contact and threaten family members or employers. And one of the really tough things is that they would show that they have seen the woman in real life. For example, they might say, at the grocery store, you were wearing a red sweater. One woman, the executive director of Women in Media and News, Jennifer Posner, found a letter at her door saying that some man was going to rape her and her mother, and she lived with her mother at the time. Another woman was sent a photograph of herself, or an image of herself and her child walking across the parking lot of the building where she lives. So those kinds of in real life contacts, coupled with these very credible rape and death threats, are quite threatening, of course. A fourth characteristic is that these attacks, and this is unlike generic trolling, again, all of these are unlike generic trolling, is that these attacks cross multiple social media or online platforms. Generic trolls tend to just stick to, if they're harassing you on Twitter or on a blog post or somewhere else, they just tend to stick to that specific spot. But these attacks tend to cross, they may start on Twitter, and they may go to Instagram, Facebook. They used to go to Tumblr. I don't know if anybody uses that anymore. Blogs, they would get the woman's email, phone, and send her text. Wikipedia, so hacking women's Wikipedia pages is very common. Reddit, and all kinds of other online forums. Posting, again, pornographic images of the target in all these forums. And seeking out the target's family members, friends, and supporters to harass them. So often not just harassing the woman, but anyone who might offer her support online. So there's just a huge, they're very widespread across all kinds of media and all kinds of ways that the women are targeted. The fifth characteristic is that they involve unusually high levels of intensity and frequency. So there'll be numerous threats or messages per day or even per hour. Some of the women I spoke with had reported receiving 50 or more threatening or harassing messages per hour, often hundreds per day, over a variety of media. The sixth characteristic is that they last an unusually long time, months and even years. At the time I wrote this book, several women had been targeted for over 5 years, just persistent targeting. And the last is the last characteristic. These attacks involve many attackers, which is the reason why they can be spread across so many media and have such a high level of intensity. These attacks are coordinated in a concerted campaign by what's called a cyber mob. And these cyber mobs form what is known as the manosphere, which are online men's forums. So the manosphere, cyber mobs originate in what's called the manosphere. And the manosphere is comprised of men's rights activists, which we know, have a lot of their criticisms are basically just anything anti-feminist. They tended to arise out of the men who were experiencing divorce and feel that they were being treated unfairly in the family court system, or men who believe that most rapes are false accusations. Pickup artists is another group that's part of the manosphere. These are men who make a game out of lying to get women to sleep with them and then demean the women. Incels, which are involuntary celibates, men who resent being celibate, resent that women are not interested in them and will not sleep with them. Another group, men going their own way, abbreviated as MGTOW. These men, I think, are interesting because they are basically male separatists, which would be fine, except for they're, unlike female separatists who are perfectly happy to be separate. These men are very bitter and very angry that they're separate. I mean, go their own way, it'd be great, but they don't just stay in their own corner. They're angry. Red pillars, and red pillars, it refers to the movie The Matrix, where they view themselves as they see the truth of what's going on. In other words, they take the red pill. The blue pill, people who take the blue pill are immersing themselves in illusion. But the reality these red pillars men take is that they claimed to see that men rather than women face sex-based discrimination, and that women are using their power to manipulate men and to take advantage of them. Fathers' rights groups, finally gamers and video gamers. Gamergaters, and I'll explain Gamergate in a minute. The manosphere tends to, some of the online forums where the manosphere occurs, it's all across the internet. And it shifts and morphs over time. They began in a place called 4chan. They were kind of shut out of that for a while, and they moved to a place called 8chan. Then Reddit. There's some sites called A Voice for Men and Slime Pit. I'm sure there's many, many other sites. And since I wrote the book, I haven't really kept up with that. So the effects of gender trolling on women are that women feel shock, anxiety, fear, terror. The women I spoke of not being able to eat or sleep, having emotional breakdowns just from the sheer intensity of these attacks and the longevity. It's not like they would just go away after a few weeks. They had anxiety attacks, became afraid to leave their houses. Many of them ended up taking anti-anxiety meds. Like all things that affect women, I think until it's seen as a political thing, women sometimes feel shame and self-blame, try to figure out what they did wrong. And of course, the sexualized shaming is particularly tough one for women for obvious reasons. Many women tried to seek relief from law enforcement, so they would report what was happening. But at that time, and I think probably it's still quite the case, that most police officers are not so much, at least certainly back then, they were not very much engaged in social media or online presence. So they didn't really understand what the women were reporting. The women would say, well, the attacks, the worst ones or the worst credible threats came from a certain IP address. But the police officers didn't really even know what an IP address was. And the police officers often told the women to just turn your computer off. But you can see where if a woman was being, you have all these threats, you kind of don't want to. So you might want to monitor them to see, is someone actually coming to your house? And are you actually going to need to do something to keep yourself safe? Many women temporarily withdrew from online activities, so they would delete their social media, make blogs private, curtailed their speech online, just tried to be more careful. Women canceled public appearances. Anita Sarkeesian, who was a prominent woman in the video gaming world, had to cancel a talk at Utah State University because they received threats about how a man was going to come shoot up the audience. And of course, in the United States, we do love our guns, so that was not, something to the university, and she agreed it was unsafe. Quite a few women ended up fleeing their own homes when the threats became particularly credible and specific. Some even permanently moving. And then I know at least one woman, and I'm sure there are more, which we really wouldn't hear about, is that they permanently withdrew from the internet. One woman who was an early victim of gender trolling campaigns was Kathy Sierra. She was a very prominent woman online who taught computer programming, and she'd written quite a few very popular computer books. She became the target of an online harassment over her support of the idea that comments should be moderated, because she was seeing these kinds of things happening to women. Many of these men felt that was harassing their freedom. That was, many of the harassers saw that as infringing on their freedom. So Kathy Sierra, in the face of just the terrific onslaught she experienced, and again, this was early on, so she didn't really have a way of understanding it as a phenomenon that was happening to a lot of women. She actually quit her tech career entirely, and she works with horses now instead. So some of the ways that women have tried to fight back include Twitter campaigns. There were some women advocate them. Criado Perez advocated the hashtag Silent No More, where women would talk about the harassment. These are again trying to like stop the shame and to kind of, instead of like hiding and thinking, oh my God, this is terrible, and to put it out there and to say this is not okay. The editor of a magazine called Fast Company, Nancy Miller, came up with the thread of the day to retweet that. The blog Feminista came up with this idea called the Next Top Troll Contest, which was kind of making fun of like the Next Top Model, which was a show at some point. Apparently, never seen it, obviously. And so they had seasons that people would get to vote for the worst incident, like people, I guess, got to vote for the top model. Rebecca Watson, who was a prominent in the New Atheist movement, created what she called a page of hate, where she just compiled all the hateful messages that were sent to her. Lindy West, who was a writer and activist, in a particularly effective thing, she read all the hate comments directed to her in a video. She very deadpan, very flat affect, and just read them. It was probably like 20-minute video. It's actually gone now. I couldn't find it. She may have taken it down, but that was a very effective kind of way of trying to showcase these comments and not take them on. And Amy Davis Roth, who is an artist, created an office space installation. So it had like just like a whole office with a desk, a chair, a computer, and all the other things you would have in an office. And she had them just covered them with all these harassing comments. And her point was to kind of say that for many women, the internet is our workspace. And so to have all these comments thrown at you all the time would be like as if your office was covered with those kinds of comments. So some of the recommendations I came up with at the time for the book that might be remedies. I think that this obviously requires all kinds of changes, but just a few things I came up with when I was researching this is that the first thing is that we need to increase the enforcement of existing laws, primarily credible threats online should be taken just as seriously as threats offline. In the United States, at least, and I assume in much of Europe, it's illegal to make threats against someone, to say, I'm going to kill you, especially if it's credible. I mean, I think if someone says it in jest, maybe it's not such a big deal. But when it's, actual credible threats are illegal. And those happen online all the time, and the law enforcement doesn't take them seriously. So they should they should enforce laws that happen offline, online. There should be cyber units, protocols for how to treat cyber harassment, and that we should have training for law enforcement to understand what like IP addresses are, what cyber harassment is, what are options. And then law enforcement needs to understand that online life has real world consequences. There are cases where, online threats have have resulted in certainly offline threats to women. In addition, laws that govern the internet, we need to create them and amend them because this is a whole new sphere and it's kind of a lawless realm at this point. One important thing is that we need to track cybercrimes against individuals, not just corporations. So there are laws, being enacted about you can't hack into a corporation, you can't, all the things that are steal their data, all things like that. But the crimes against people on the internet are not being really. There's not a lot of time spent on making laws around those. It's much more focused on corporations. And then cultural change, which I think this is part of what this book was about for me, and obviously there's a lot of other women making efforts on this behalf, is to name these phenomena, to raise awareness, and to galvanize public opinion against online harassment, and to shame gender trolls so that the abusers and harassers, not the victims, should be shamed. As Giselle Pellicot, the woman in the south of France who was drugged and raped by her husband, I think it was particularly eloquent. Shame must change sides. So in addition to gender trolling, and again, the internet is, relatively new form of media. So there's all these different ways that men are coming up with to take advantage of these media, of new media. They always do, to abuse, degrade, objectify, and attack women. So some other forms of internet abuse that happen are what's called non-consensual distribution of images, intimate images. So that would include revenge porn, for example, revenge pornography, where a woman might have given a sexually explicit image to her boyfriend or partner, and then in the context of an intimate relationship, and then he shares it later, often motivated by personal animosity toward the woman. Maybe she broke up with him and he is angry because he's rejected, as men are so often. Non-consensual distribution of intimate images also includes videos or images that are obtained surreptitiously through hacking phones, through hacking into women's websites, or the use of a hidden camera, such as upskirting. Images that are digitally altered to make it look like the woman is nude or engaged in sexual contact. And also women, increasingly now, images or videos that are created with artificial intelligence. So we need to create, this is important to think about how are we going to handle this particular form of internet abuse against women. Another one, and these ones really need naming, that just like how named gender trolling, and I'm not particularly wedded to that name. I just think the phenomena need to be seen as real, as things that happen and not just this amorphous things. But at any rate, another one is what I have called rape by proxy. This is particularly horrific, where a woman's ex-husband or ex-boyfriend is angry at her, and so he will go to impersonate her online on, say, a dating site or on Craigslist, which is a list we have. I don't know if you have that overseas, but or in Europe. And anyway, he impersonates her on online forums, and he pretends to be her and says, "I enjoy rape fantasies. I'm encouraging men to come to my home and fulfill my rape fantasy." And then he would post her address, and other contact information. And so these women experience, dozens of strange men, if not more, coming to her home, often trying to break in as part of what they see as the rape fantasy that she has said she would like to enact. So this is because this is when you talk to law enforcement about this, it's no way to explain that this is a thing that happens. So we need to talk about that and know that that's what men do, and then again see that this is a pattern of abuse against women. Rape blackmail videos. This has been happening, especially in India, but I'm sure it happens across all kinds of places. This is where a woman is raped or gang raped, and the rape is filmed, and the rapist then threatened to post the video if she reports the rape. So that's also horrific. Again, citing Giselle Pellico, if shame changes sides, that will be less effective, because I think it's crazy that in a video like that the woman is the one who's shamed and not the rapists. But that it holds power in many places where women do feel shame. Sexual shaming being such a huge part of women's oppression. And then drugging women for rape. Again, what happened to Giselle Pellico? We need a name for this. This is a thing that has happened to more than just her. And there may be more forms of abuse against women that happen online coming. I'm sure that men will think of more things to do. So implications for the future. Gender trolling grew out of what's called Gamergate and the rise of the manosphere. So I mentioned Gamergate before, and a lot of people know about this, but if you haven't, basically online gender trolling, or the whole phenomena of gender trolling, began with what's called Gamergate. And this was something that happened around 2012. It was ongoing for quite a few years. It happened when a woman who was a video gamer wrote a video game called Depression Quest. And the gamers were really, male video gamers were very upset that women were invading their spaces. And they really hated this game because it wasn't, instead of being an action-based violent game where there's chases and shootings and things, it was a game that kind of based on a woman living with, or a person living with depression, and all the things that you would go through to deal with that. So obviously that's not a very male-oriented kind of game. at any rate, this woman, Zoe Quinn, broke up with her boyfriend. And then he was obviously resentful, like men are when they get broken up with. And he posted a blog about her saying that she had cheated on him with multiple men. So the men were outraged. How could she do this? And really, they were outraged because she was a woman trying to infringe on what they felt was their terrain. But they couldn't. It was a bad look to say, "Oh, well, she's so terrible," because I mean, perhaps she did cheat on this man. That's really nobody's business, but his and hers. So they ended up coming up with this idea that it was really about what they called ethics in video game journalism, because one of the men that purportedly she had slept with was the writer of, he reviewed video games for some kind of video game publication. And they felt that she was sleeping with him to get her video game review, good review. Well, apparently, whatever relationship she had with this man, he had written like one sentence about her game before she even had anything to do with him. So it wasn't even accurate. She did not obtain any kind of positive reviews. So it was completely bogus and trumped up. It was just men were resentful of women in video gaming. And then another prominent woman who was involved in Gamergate was Anita Sarkeesian. And she was creating videos about sexism in video gaming, ironically. And she became the recipient of very vicious attacks for a long time. She was the one who had to cancel her talk at Utah State University. So the manosphere is actually a grooming ground, which again is also a manosphere kind of arose out of Gamergate, and then it coalesced across a whole variety of places on the internet. And it has become a grooming ground for recruiting young, disaffected, and resentful men into what's called the alt-right. And the alt-right is very prominent now in the United States. It's basically a far-right white national movement. And some of the same players that were prominent in Gamergate became powerful figures in the Trump administration. Steve Bannon, who was a promoter of Gamergate through his Breitbart publications, and he wrote a lot about it and promoted people who did. He became the White House chief strategist in the first Trump administration. Another man, Mike Cernovich, was also very involved in Gamergate attacks. He, in fact, hired a private investigator to harass the video gamer who broke up with her boyfriend, Zoe Quinn. He was a very vocal Trump supporter and prominent in that campaign. Interestingly, David Shore, there was an interview with him in the New York Times. He's an American data scientist, and he analyzes political polls. And there was an interview with him where he analyzed the results of the recent American presidential election, when Trump was elected. What he found was that the gender gap for young men is much greater than it is for older men at this point. And this is a new thing. So for older people, the gender gap, men who voted for Trump were 10 points. In other words, they were 10 points difference between men who voted for Trump than women. So say, for example, 60% of men voted for Trump, which say 50% of women did. I just made those numbers up, but that's what the point difference would be, the spread. For 18-year-old men, though, it was a 23-point difference. So 18-year-olds were much more likely to support Donald Trump than 18-year-old women, 18-year-old men than 18-year-old women. So it appears that young men are becoming more misogynistic even than older men, and more involved in this kind of alt-right. And of course, a key cornerstone of the Trump administration is misogyny. David Shore postulated that the internet plays a significant role in this dramatic increase in young men becoming more misogynistic. He notes that online communities are especially gender segregated. Obviously, in the manosphere, that's huge. And the manosphere is populated by young men to a large extent. So manosphere is a big component of sexism and the alt-right, especially because before the internet, men who were kind of so bitter and antisocial like that, they tended to be isolated in their communities, and they weren't quite so easy for them to find each other, but the internet has greatly facilitated that. In addition to the manosphere and just men's communities online, I think, of course, pornography, which is obviously rampant on the internet, is a huge grooming tool to groom young men to extreme anti-women sentiments as well. Yeah, so I think that's all I have to say. So if people
Thank
have questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karla. I'm going to get Marian on screen, hopefully, as well, so she can sort of lead off with some questions, I guess. And then we'll see if we'll get Marian's
There we
video.
go. There
There we
I
are.
am.
Great. Add
Um,
spotlight. Okay, there you
that
are.
was great, Karla. When I read the book, I mean, you know, you have a lot of quotes in there, about what these guys said. It was, I mean, it was awful to read. How did you read all that stuff and not want to go out and machete every man you met?
Well, who says I don't want to do that? Well, so, and actually, I didn't include those quotes in this talk. I did include those quotes in the book because, and they're
Yeah.
just horrific. They're horrific to read. And I did include them on purpose because I felt that people needed to understand how serious this is. And this
Mhm.
isn't just calling a woman a cunt or a whore. They're so horrendous. They're so awful. They're unimaginably, like, they're shockingly bad. So I do apologize. And I know it did make the book really tough to read. But I didn't want, I felt that for people who needed convincing, that this is much worse than just people being insulted on the internet. They needed to see how bad it is. But yes, wanting to machete men, I mean, that's an ongoing thing for me.
I mean, it must have been really, really hard for you to read that stuff. Did you have to take breaks, at intervals or did you
You
just
know,
plow through it?
it's interesting because I talked to a lot of women in terms of how they handled it. And a couple of women told me that they had, like one in particular said, she says that's her superpower, that she, although initially, because all these things were such a shock to women at first and they had all kinds of anxiety, she said she just somehow became inured to it and was like, fuck you all. And just became, and that's kind of me too. I just have this way where I get hardened and I'm just angry. And so I can be detached. I'm lucky that way. I mean, lucky or it's terrible, perhaps. I don't know whether it's a bad thing or not.
You talked about police telling women, "Oh, just get off the internet," or, I mean, are there any, having like read all this stuff, I mean, is there anything you think, or like any key things you think that women can do to avoid or respond to any of this? And do you think women should be responding to it at all? And whether they do or not, is there anything they can do to just like, you know, get away, or just like, not be not be so attacked or feel so attacked?
Um, yeah, I don't know if there's, I mean, at the time, first of all, I just want to say something about the get off the internet. I mean, that's basically, isn't that what they want? They want women out of the internet. So that's
Right.
a terrible, terrible advice. And it doesn't even work, but it's because I think that these gender trolling campaigns are precisely what men are trying to do, is to have this public space be for
Mhm.
men only. This is a long historical pattern. Men have wanted all public spaces to just be for men. So that is completely wrong. And for many women, your career depends on you being able to be on the internet, particularly journalists who often
Mhm.
need to be on social media, and all kinds of people need to be online for their careers. As far as successful strategies, I certainly they now when people often would say, just don't pay attention to them, don't quote feed the trolls. I mean, I think that's true for generic trolls because then they give up and move on. But these gender trolls, that doesn't seem to stop them. I've certainly talked to women who they just tried shutting down and not doing anything, and the men still came after them. I mean, certainly, I assume after many years they would give up, but years is a long time to experience.
Mhm.
I think I don't think there's anything successful except for to find a way to inure yourself to it. If you once you see this is what men do. This is a pattern. I think then if you can find a way to not take it on and not take it personally and not, rape and death threats are horrific, of course, But if you just think, oh, that's just them being terrible, this isn't about me. Or the sexual shaming in particular, which is, just in the context of what happens to women in this world, it's, so many women are raped, so many women are victims of sexual abuse. So sexual shaming is a really awful thing to do. But I think that the more women can talk to talk to other women, so they find out that this is not about you. It's just, this is about you as a woman, and to see it as that. And then sometimes that can inspire anger. And I think being angry is a better self-protection than being wounded by these things, if it's possible. And of course, every woman I spoke to, every single one to the last one, said they do not blame a woman for whatever her reactions are. There's no way you should say, oh, if only you had done this and only you had done that. That it is just an awful thing to deal with, and that we need to support whatever the woman needs to do to go through it, to get herself through it.
There's a question in the chat. What would you call the book now if you could change the name? And she says, I like the name Gender Trolling, particularly given most women accept the term gender, but would you change the title now?
Well, I don't know, because sex-based trolling doesn't, I wanted to have something that was a little bit catchy, but gender trolling hasn't even taken off. So I don't know. I leave that open to other women to come up with something.
Okay. Somebody else comments that, she's beginning to see men as 7-year-olds in men's bodies, which is better than what I see them, which is like as not really fully quite human. And says that she's lost almost all respect for men. And you talked about older men not being as vicious and bad about it as younger men. It's getting worse. But we are seeing now boys as young as 12 years old, 10 years old, occasionally even younger, with just stuff that's really savage and sick. What do you think the progression of this is? What do you think explains it? Or is it just being online, or is it?
I think it's being online. It's being online, it's social media spaces, it's men talking to other men. And I think that men, when they're just with each other, do terrible things. And online has really promoted that. It has all these forums. And I think online pornography is huge. Very young boys are exposed to it now. I have no idea how to approach that or what to do. It's so prevalent, and it's just, most people don't even see it as a problem or a significant one. Yeah, it's frightening. And I do wonder if that's what's fueling some of the authoritarian backlash that's happening throughout the world, because sexism is a really kind of a foundational feature of authoritarianism. All authoritarians have a deeply sexist, misogynistic streak, and it may manifest in different ways, but authoritarianism and real serious sexism are linked in almost all cases. So I wonder how much of that is fueled by what's happening on the internet, and it's so huge. It's hard to know how to approach it. It's interesting. Like, I once read a study years ago, though, and I think this is interesting too, is that when there's a family scenario where there's an authoritarian or abusive father, the boys tend to become more right-wing, and the girls in those families tend to become more liberal or progressive or left-wing. And I don't know what that's about. I wonder if men are in authoritarian kind of structures are very afraid, and then they become really, quote, strong in the way that they think is a way to kind of defend themselves against that, and strong being, authoritarian and sexist.
Somebody made a comment that, women need to be in mixed space, women need safe spaces on the internet. There's a dark net, why not a woman's net? And a comment earlier said that even mom's net is now being kind of taken over or infested by, AGPs and men. Do you think that's inevitable? Or, I mean, I wonder if some of that is just because women are still have in the back of their heads those three, I call it the lib fem trifecta. Oh, not all men are like that. Oh, but not my Nigel. And oh, well, women do it too. So I don't know if that's part of why even supposedly, places that were started specifically to be women's spaces still get taken over. I don't know if that's inevitable. And then someone else after that made a comment about, you know, women needing to be in mixed spaces to raise awareness. So I'm not sure where the sweet spot is, you know, unless we can maintain specifically women's spaces. And I'm not sure that's possible online. What do you think it
Well,
is?
it's really tough online because you can't, so much of online activity is anonymous. You can't even say what sex people are for sure. I mean, a lot of times we know, but for sure you can't. Yeah, I think that's really true, what you said about the trifecta. That's really a thing. Yeah, it's a conundrum because in a way, I think there should be no male-only spaces. There should only be mixed sex spaces and women's spaces. I don't think men shouldn't be allowed, but who wants to be in the mixed sex spaces with men? I mean, obviously a lot of women do, but I think male-only spaces are very dangerous. But women-only spaces are very needed. But when you go with, you know, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, I don't think that applies when it comes to women-only spaces at all.
No, I mean, I forget who made the comparison between slave owners and slaves, is that the slave owners really don't need specifically slave owner spaces because they're still the slave owners. It's the slaves who need their own spaces that the slave owners are never allowed into.
Exactly.
And somebody makes the comment that Mumsnet, which we just mentioned, that they have their fair share of trolls, but they're largely ignored or laughed out of the place. And I think that may be a strategy also, is to just ridicule. Back in the day, I mean, many years ago, the prototype of what we now consider the, you know, autogynephilic heterosexual men who say they're lesbians would try to get into lesbian spaces, and we could at least, you know, early on either just forbid them admission or kick them out. But a lot of what kept them from getting out of hand was that they were ridiculed. And it's like, oh, you shouldn't ridicule them. It is okay to ridicule that which is ridiculous. And when we're online, one of the things that I notice, the you know, the TRAs and especially the men find particularly troubling is to simply not be taken seriously or to be ridiculed. Do you think is that too dangerous? Is that effective? What do you think of that as a response?
I mean, it could be dangerous. I don't know, but I do think that's particularly effective. And one of the reasons it's effective is because the more women, in order to do that, if we have solidarity as women with each other, in other words, one woman can't ridicule a person. It needs to be most women need to be on that page, and that group dynamic will shut them down. So I think women's solidarity is absolutely essential in any of these things, because one woman on our own, it's too hard to deal with it. But if we can act in unison and kind of as a group ridicule them, it can't be all women, of course, but if most of us can kind of get on that page, or at least most of us in a specific group or in a specific site, then I think that can be an effective thing, that it does shut them down. And I do agree, men don't want to be ridiculed. And so that's probably an effective thing. I don't think there is anything I could say or anyone could say that is always effective, but absolutely solidarity with other women and feminist consciousness, I think, are indispensable to end all of this. We cannot survive without that.
We just have a minute or two left. Is there any particular remaining word of wisdom that you would like to you know, leave us with? It was great, Karla. It was really great. I'm so glad you wrote the book.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I just wrote the book because I think that as women, part of us talking to each other, it's basically like consciousness raising, which is we need to keep becoming conscious of the new forms. Misogyny and patriarchy tend to morph. I see them as like whack-a-mole, the game whack-a-mole, where it comes up one way and you smack it down, it comes up, and we have to constantly be talking to each other and seeing how it morphs and how it changes in order to oppress us in different ways. And we just need to be on our feet all the time, trying to see what's happening now and naming it. I think naming is so important to fighting things. Otherwise, we're bowled over by the effects.
There's one question that I just noticed. You may have to answer this yes or no very quickly. How much of this trolling is AI bots? It may not have been 10 years ago,
When
but
I wrote the book, it was not. They didn't have that then. So I don't know now, actually.
okay, that's what I figured. I think we're just about out of time. Thank you so much. It's a really great book to read, disturbing to read the stuff that's there. I'm glad you wrote it. Thank you so much for being here, Karla. That was a very great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I thank to everybody who came.
Thanks.